tennis, for example, and this is common with a lot of sports, is that the high-performing athletes or the athletes that are at the higher level usually have a team around them. And the team around them, which is not just a manager, it's a coach and might be physio, everyone that's taking care of an aspect of that player's career, all with the sole objective of taking that pressure off the player to allow them just to focus on what they're good at. So the purpose of being a manager in our main role is to represent, effectively be that player in representing them, to take that hassle, like endorsements and appearances and, activations and any contractual issues that they might have and all of that. We take that off of them and take that away from them. Of course, we've got to talk to them and consult with them, but we do it and they tell us what they want to do and we go and do it. But it's all about letting them focus on what they do best. Oh, I forgot.
Welcome to another episode of Going Pro, and today we have Garry Winter with us today. Now, Garry has 20 years experience as taxation and commercial lawyer. During that time, you've assisted many companies, small, large, to structure their business, but that is not where we are looking to go. So currently, you're the director of W Sports and Media, which is a talent management agency representing some of the best athletes in the world, media personalities, musicians. Some of the notable people you work with: Dan Evans, Isaac Rankin, Charlie Dixon, Orazio Fantasia, Matt and Brad Crouch, Kyle Chalmers, and that's just in the sporting world. I haven't even touched the media and the musicians as well. So very interested for my own personal development to understand what goes on in talent, player management, because it's something that I don't know much about, and I'm super curious to know what even goes on in this world. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And my first question is, Garry, how did you get into this and what made you enter this space for player management in the whole sports media arena?
Yeah, it's an interesting way we started because, as you mentioned, Luke, I've been a lawyer for many years and the area of specialty for law is tax law. And so as a result of that, I've ended up representing a lot of sort of high-profile people. And over the years, there was sort of consistency with the people that we represented about some dissatisfaction with the people who represented them, the managers for them. So, and that, I guess, set off a little note for us to say maybe there's an opportunity there to do it a little bit better. And myself and one other person who started it with me, Dimmy Parhas, both sort of dreamed about the opportunity to do this, but it was always difficult, busy lives and everything. But about 7 or 8 years ago, we got the opportunity, started up our own law firm, and then we decided to start up the sports practice at the same time, W Sports Media. And the catalyst for it was probably Leighton Hewitt. So Leighton had been a long-term client from the legal perspective, and he was coming towards the end of his career, and he had been through several management companies, but at this stage, later in his career, he'd actually just employed a guy called David Drysdale, who was full-time looking after Leighton. And when he was looking at his plans about retiring, obviously he didn't really need a full-time manager with him anymore. So that was the sort of really the commencement of it, where we sort of did a deal with Leighton to take over his management, and we employed David Drysdale, who was employed by Leighton prior to that, as our general manager of the sports media company. And as a result of that, there were a few other tennis players as well at the same time that didn't have managers, and so they were pretty much the first clients of W Sports and Media.
So it really started from a tennis background. Like, you saw a hole in the market, and then Leighton, your first client, and what a client to have, because then from there so many more doors open, because if you got trust from Leighton, then other tennis players are going to get that backing. So did you feel like you had that momentum coming pretty early on?
Yeah, very much. I mean, you're not going to get a better first client than someone like Leighton, who was still playing and still very active in the tennis world at that stage. Also had a great relationship with Ryan Fitzgerald, who was an ex, Crows and Sydney footballer who'd now transitioned into the media. So again, had done a fair bit of legal work for Fitzy with his contract negotiations with Nova at the time, and then it was a natural transition. He'd had the same manager for many years, and he was looking to, he was excited by the prospect as well, and he's a shareholder of the company at the same time as well. So it was a really, he was probably only an inch behind Leighton in terms of the first clients, and he was certainly part of that initial stable that we thought we would start with. And that was a great person as well in the media side, and also he's got great contacts still through the sporting industry as well, so many, AFL particularly.
That's really interesting, because when people think about jumping and changing career path, they think about starting from scratch, but you'd already done a lot of work with some of these clients in the law space and just legal space that you could easily transition, and you had that kind of building, and it was almost like a bridge to this new career path.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Absolutely. And the benefit, I guess, for us having the law practice and the other things we were doing is we weren't coming into this business with the main prospect of trying to make money. Like, we were making good money elsewhere. Yeah. What we were trying to do was create something special, do something a bit different. So it enabled us to have a degree of flexibility about the way we sought the structure and how we go about things at W Sports and Media that probably other managers and agents who are pretty focused on the bottom line and putting food on the table as their careers, we had more flexibility than that, and we could be a bit more creative, and we could add a bit more value early on and tweak and change things. It wasn't all about just making money from the clients that we represented. Yeah,
having that financial base to actually set things up properly would have been like a huge advantage for you guys, and not, I guess, have that much pressure to take some risks early on.
Yeah, correct, exactly. We weren't. It was in terms of decision making and taking a chance or taking a risk. We were pretty open. We were all, in fact, it's probably culturally the underpinning of the organisation itself is to take a calculated risk and not stick to the norm and do things a little bit differently. And having that flexibility to be a bit more creative is a really powerful thing in business generally.
Is this something you've been thinking about for a long time? You just didn't have, it wasn't maybe the right time to enter the space, or you weren't ready, or you didn't have the systems or structures in place to actually make that bridge transition?
Yeah, it was certainly about the right time, and the law and representing clients and sports and talent management and representing clients are not too far apart in terms of general professional services. So there was always that talk, but within a sort of larger law firm where I was at the time, where we were at the time, we'd put propositions up almost to do it within the law firm, but lawyers are very tied to 6-minute units and charging certain hourly rates and those sorts of things, and the sports management financial revenue model is very different to that. It's commission based. It's taking speculative positions on things. It's getting paid later, not upfront, and doing a lot of work, and in securing clients and initially working for them and those sorts of things. So the other partners or the businesses, the legal businesses that I was in, you just couldn't get their head around that at all, and so it was always a blocker. And it wasn't until we started up our own law firm that we had the flexibility to not worry about that. But we did it, and it sort of started almost as part of the law firm, but very quickly we completely separated it out into its own business.
Yeah, I think this is really good advice that I'm hearing right now, just to, I guess, have a career path where you start building and not jump the gun too early, because I feel like a lot of people in my generation, even younger than myself, are so quick just to go, I want to be at the top right now. I want to just completely drop everything and chase my goals and dreams, without actually financially setting themselves up well on the chessboard that they can actually make very good strategic moves. Is that something that you would give advice to people like myself and younger than myself, to actually, maybe it doesn't need to be your passion early on, you just need to set yourself up a little bit more financially before you start maybe making some of these big life moves towards passion in a career space?
Yeah, look, exactly. And not just in business, in life and everything. I mean, the big do your homework is the first thing. Is like you often see people jumping in and not understanding because they just haven't researched, or they've got an image of what something is, and the reality is very rarely what the image is, and you develop your images through TV shows and snippets of things. And then when you get in, particularly sports management, it has a an attraction to it in the first place. A lot of people, that's what I want to do, and then you sort of explain to them it's not just swanning around. A little bit about swanning around the world and meeting famous people and high performing people, but there's a lot of grunt work, and you've got to deal with grumpy people, and there's a lot of work. So doing your homework first. Mm-hmm. And then I'm a big believer across business, and particularly in our business, is you're going to make mistakes, and learning from your mistakes is the big thing. Now, being in the position we were in, we could afford to make mistakes and tweak and learn from it. Some people can't. So the more you have patience and time and take your time in it, and potentially work in the industry and then start up your own business, those sorts of things, the more mistakes you make, you don't repeat them, or you hopefully don't repeat them. Mm. And that's learning from your mistakes and your failures is, I think, the best lesson you can ever have.
This is just a quick note on our podcast sponsor. This podcast would not be possible without the support from 4RT. They are a creative house that helps businesses with their advertising, marketing, and content needs. If your business has a story to tell, then these guys can really help you with that story. And through ATA, they've helped us massively, and we trust these guys dearly, and we feel like they're the best in the business. So they could add a lot of value to your marketing and advertising needs. So when an athlete says they have a manager, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so it's someone who represents them. So, and look, take tennis, for example, and this is common with a lot of sports, is that the high-performing athletes, or the athletes that are at the higher level, usually have a team around them. And the team around them, which is not just a manager, it's a coach, and might be a physio, everyone that's taking care of an aspect of that player's career, all with the sole objective of taking that pressure off the player to allow them just to focus on what they're good at. So the purpose of being a manager in our main role is to represent, effectively be that player in representing them, to take that hassle, like endorsements and appearances and activations and any contractual issues that they might have and all of that. We take that off of them and take that away from them. Of course, we've got to talk to them and consult with them, but we do it, and they tell us what they want to do, and we go and do it. But it's all about letting them focus on what they do best. And so what we do best is just to focus on that area and to get a little bit more granular into it. Again, it's a broad range of what we do as managers, but in general terms, it is around sort of the financial side of a sport. Like I'm not there telling a tennis player how to play tennis. I'm not there telling an AFL player how to play footy, or how to manage injuries, or how to improve their backhand or their forehand. Mm-hmm. And we're there to say, we think we can get you some great endorsement deals, or we might be. It's not just about the money of those deals. There's a lot about the money, but it's about a brand that might represent that player well. So it's and there's some no-go zones with that, sometimes with gambling companies or alcohol. So it's got to reflect the player when we go out and look at sponsorship opportunities for them. Sometimes in tennis, there's appearance monies as well that we negotiate with tournaments for the higher ranking players. And then sometimes it's just as, a player might say, I need help with some accommodation, I'm struggling with that, or I need help, I'm struggling with the visa, to get into a country. Now, there's ATP and the WTA and that have resources to help them with that. So, but if there's a gap, we do it. But if you said what's the main area that we do is commercial opportunities to exploit the players, brand and their image and their reputation with various companies out there, is the main sort of bread and butter that we do.
Yeah, that sounds super diverse. Like your role is so many different things going on all at once, and then dealing with completely different athletes all the time and their needs. That'd be really interesting. And I'm guessing that super busy all the time with managing that many players. So can you paint me a picture of what a busy day would look like in your role?
Yeah, look, so, obviously we're running the law firm as well at the same time, so I'm trying to balance a lot of these things, and I'm involved in other businesses as well, and so things pop up. But if we just focus on the sports, if I was solely doing a day in the sports management company, It involves, in a general sense, it involves a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings. Often it involves hopping on a plane and going somewhere. Obviously, that's faded off through COVID, but that's coming back with a vengeance right now. And so, usually I start the day with a list of things I've got to do, and that list is usually long. And then it depends on the type. So AFL, for example, is a big one. Like right at the moment, we've got a few players we represent that are out of contract. So almost, every day, even in the current life, I'm speaking to a list manager or a football director at a AFL club, talking about the players that we have that are looking at, so either at the club they're at to look at extensions of their contract, or at other clubs that are, speaking to us about potentially looking at a trade for that player to come across. So that's but later in the year that sort of happens less, and your day might be more dominated in AFL about, more towards the draft or. And then as you get closer to trade periods, so there are peaks and troughs always in a day. And then in the same vein with, we have, 6 or 7 employees that run. We've got a CEO, Steve Baldus, who runs the sports management business. So typically my day will be sort of liaising with them and speaking to them about what they're doing and, making sure they're, looking after the talent, or if the talent's rung me directly, I'll pass on, sort of some requests from them and what we need to do as well.
So a bit more managing and overseeing, and then getting hands-on when you need to.
Correct, yeah.
Nice. So how do you guys actually make money as player managers?
Yeah, so the financial model changes to different sports, and we're very flexible. As I said, we're not wedded to one thing. We try and tailor the revenue side of things in terms of what we charge, depending on the player and their circumstances. So, typically it's commission-based. Sometimes we arrange fixed fee arrangements for certain talent in certain circumstances. So we just agree a fee, an annual fee or something like that, and charge them. When in terms of commission-based, for an AFL player, the commission's based on their playing contract, which is a small commission, and then a higher commission for endorsement opportunities that we secure for them. In terms of a tennis player or a golfer, we don't take anything from prize money. So anything they earn and they make, unlike sort of a AFL footballer, is theirs, and then we take a sort of commission, which might vary the range of commissions from the commercial opportunities that we secure for them.
Why is that? Why is the difference between AFL and tennis in terms of taking some prize money from, or their earnings in AFL compared to tennis, where you don't take that at all?
There's a number of reasons for it. Sometimes it's just historical, and the AFL is very regulated. So there's, they have the AFL Players Association, which govern managers as well, and actually dictates various terms. And you have standard agreements with in AFL around, with the clubs. So every player's playing contract is exactly the same, except for the specific terms and conditions, like the length of time and the money they're earning. So there's not a lot of contract negotiation in that sense. And in AFL, it tends to be, I guess it's what's fair and equitable. It's more difficult for an AFL to get commercial opportunities for an AFL player because there are much more restrictions. The AFL impose restrictions on protected sponsors. And the clubs have protected sponsors as well. And a player is not allowed to get sponsorships from those protected sponsors or that are contradictory to those protected sponsors.
So it's harder to market in that way?
It is, yeah. And also, it just lessens the pool of opportunities. And also probably, as you can imagine, the protected sponsors are very good sponsors. So car dealerships and, bigger companies that are spending a lot of money on AFL, but they're spending their money on the clubs or the AFL sort of thing. So you're sort of left with the smaller stuff, for an AFL player. And then there's a fair bit around their contract negotiation with clubs, like talking, not negotiating the specific wording of the contract, but doing the deals for them with a club and sitting down. So I think the players are happy to take a smaller percentage out of their salary rather than just saying you don't touch that and you just get the commercial opportunities, because it wouldn't be economic for most managers to be putting in that effort just to take the commission off of the commercial opportunities.
Does that make you not want to go into the AFL as much and manage other sports where there isn't as much regulation, and maybe it's like less work and the amount of, I guess, groundwork you have to do just to sign an AFL player sounds so much more than other sports, for example?
But it is difficult, but once we've made a decision, like in terms of the talent we represent, we're very broad, like we're across a number of sports, and we've got other sports we're not currently in that we're looking at, or sports that we'd like to be stronger at. So generally I take the view of it's just, any sport is, in terms of making sense to go into it or how much time we spend on it, becomes an economic decision as well. Now, there's definitely an economic basis to go into AFL, but what you tend to say is representing, 4 or 5 players, you couldn't sort of, from a business sense, make money out of that. It wouldn't be profitable. So there's a critical mass of players in a sport like AFL that you really need to have to, A, properly service them, and B, to actually make money out of what you do, because there's a fair bit of replication. When I'm talking to a list manager at a club, I'm talking to them about 3 or 4 players at a time, generally. It's not just individually with that player. But then the economics around sort of tennis, obviously, or golf. They're sports that there's fewer. It's international, so you're a bigger pool. But if you represent the best AFL player, they're probably earning $800 to $1,000 a year to $1 million a year, say, in that range. That's the very elite. But if you're representing the best tennis player, or even a top 10 tennis player, or even a top 20 tennis player,
just thinking what that,
the economics are, when you're taking a commission on even the endorsements that they get, and there's significant endorsements for those players, you'd only need one tennis player to make that economically viable, to make it sense. So versus, say, 40 AFL players, and you probably still wouldn't get to the same
100%.
Economic level.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So do you guys actually go out and seek talent? Like, do you watch all different sports and you see someone with a certain personality and you go, I really want to try to target them? Or do people target you guys more? What's that process like in your world? Yeah,
it's a little bit of both, but more we go out and target talent. There's a lot of word of mouth as well. So when the players that come in are usually, like to pick an AFL player, they're in the locker room, they're talking to someone, and someone says, I don't like my manager, he doesn't return my calls, doesn't do this, blah, blah, blah. And so what we try and pride ourselves on is when they have that conversation, the player that we represent who's in that conversation will say, go and ring Garry or Dimmy or Steve.
Yeah.
Talk to them, because I'm happy with them. And if you're not happy with your manager, maybe you can get a better deal with them. And it's the same in tennis as well. You tend to find when you go out and get a player that sometimes you pick up 2, 3 players at the same time, that you get a bit of momentum from the talk amongst it. But then talent identification is also important. But we actually, as a business, unlike most other managers, we don't spend a lot of time on talent identification. We take the view there's enough pundits out there already that their lives are about journalists and talent, scouts and list managers and talent managers out there that are doing that on a full-time basis. We don't need to reinvent that. We'll leverage off their things, and it's generally public knowledge because people are interested in who's the next big thing. And in terms of tennis, you can go down to, probably, we have a bit of a rule about not going too young, but in tennis would be, 16, 17 is when you sort of really first might start to hear about a player up and coming, and even then they might not go on with it.
Yeah.
And in AFL, it's a bit the same. But again, the same story, in AFL, 1 year there'll be the player who's they're saying is going to be the number 1 draft pick when they come up to the draft in a couple of years, and then in 2 years' time they're not even on the radar anymore. So it changes a lot. So we don't see a lot of benefit in putting huge resources into early identification because, as I said, the information's there and it changes.
Yeah. So who's the youngest athlete that you've signed? Across maybe a couple of different sports.
Yeah, it's I'd have to think about it. It would be there are rules in AFL. You're not allowed to sign a player until their draft year. So that's just a standard rule. You couldn't go any earlier to sign a player at all. But in tennis and in golf and other sports, there's no rules around it. You could sign a player when they were, born, basically. Even sometimes you might even before they're born. I've heard stories about, famous athletes having children and people expecting them to be high-performing athletes even before they were born. But, yeah, probably I think we signed I think she was maybe 11 or 10 at once. So we didn't sign them. We just said we're happy to represent her as a tennis player. And there was a good reputation about them, good family. They were nice people. And the reason they spoke to us was because they were starting to get phone calls from some of the tennis manufacturers, and they didn't know what they didn't know, so they spoke to us and said, look, could you help us with, and we said, yeah, don't need to sign you, but we're happy to help you and build that goodwill and that faith with them for hopefully later on in life. But again, acknowledging, I was out at Golf SA, which is just near here, in their boardroom, and they've got a honour board up there of the junior champions, the Australian Junior Open, and you look at the board for the past 100 years, and there were probably, there might have been 80 plus names on there. I reckon there were 2 that I'd heard of. So, and this would be typical, I think, in all sports. Even at the junior level, they might be 17 or 18 years old winning those tournaments. So they're still later in life, they're not 11, but they, for whatever reason, just don't go on with it. Sometimes it's because, and you see this in AFL a fair bit, that kids grow at different levels, so they shoot up above everyone else, or they're a bit earlier bloomer. And tennis can be the same. I watched, my nephews, both of them are excellent tennis players, and I've gone out to watch them through the junior tournaments over the years, and sometimes they're playing a kid that's 6'2", same age as them, and they're at that stage, struggling to be 5 foot. So it's a big advantage, and so there's swings and roundabouts around that factor as well.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing when I was in Canberra, just looking at the past winners of the national event there, and you just look at the names, and you know who they are because you're in the community, but you just look at only such a select few going on to do something big, and obviously the notable ones are Nick Kyrgios and Thanasi Kokkinakis. Aside from that, you just see so many other guys and girls that are amazing, but they never really went on. It doesn't define or clearly indicate that they're going to go to the top. Because, like you said, so many things can change. And obviously there is so much change in the last, let's say, 10 years, especially around marketing yourself, online image. So when you guys are looking at people or they come to you, do you do a real, research into who they are online, their social media, what sort of presence they have? And does that really push you into signing them or push you away depending on how they look or whether they might bring a lot of controversy, or do you want to enter that, or do you feel like you don't want to entertain that? Where do you guys sit with that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's probably a couple of parts to that. Is back to the commercial decision about representing. We took when we first started up our business, I think we very quickly got to probably 80 plus people that we represented. And we were generating a huge amount of momentum, and we were getting phone calls of people I remember there was the world champion wakeboarder we represented, and there were some brothers, I think they were, that had won the gold medal in judo for Australia, which was unheard of. And of course, it sounded fantastic, signing them up, and then again, by learning from your mistakes sort of thing, we went out into the market and realised there was just no commercial. It wasn't that there wasn't commercial appeal with those players; they were champions, but there was no commercial market out there. No one was interested in these guys, apart from usually just the suppliers, the judo, the white things that they wear. And but they weren't pumping in a lot of money into that, or if any money, they might just give them, free supply. So we quickly learned. So we actually went through a stage where we signed all these players, and then we didn't want to, we made a vow, we don't want to represent anyone that we don't add value to. It's all about adding value to them. And so we ended up culling a lot of players, and in a respectful way, we sort of called them up and said, look, we just don't think we can, we tried, and we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to set your expectations too high, and so there's a bit about being honest about who you represent. So we take that on board with all the players. There's no point in signing them unless we think there's some commercial opportunities. And on that point, right at this present point in time, which wouldn't have been the same probably 10 years ago, social media following is the be-all and end-all in this. So we know in the current commercial opportunities that we're negotiating, there's always a huge element from the company that's wanting to put money into it about how many social media followers someone has. Now, that doesn't mean we have actually represented a few sort of social media
like
influencers, if you call them those, who had millions of followers, but they didn't have the underlying sort of reputation in terms of the sport. So, but plenty do, and plenty commercialise what they do. So it's not just about the social media followers or what level they are, but in every activation that we do, there's an element of social media. And so, but that doesn't mean if we're signing a talent in the first place and we see their social media followers aren't really where they should be, it's probably the first thing probably part of the pitch almost of signing them is saying we've done a whole lot of analysis. We have a standard set of analysis we do for them. We've compared you with other players and other people that are around you, and your social media following is well done. So the first thing we're going to do is get in and put together a plan about getting your social media following back up, and that plan would be different for all the players.
Yeah, that's interesting. That segues into a thought I had around managing Dan Evans. So I'm curious to know how that all unfolded, and then my second part to that is just on what you just said, because I saw on Instagram, for example, that Dan actually didn't have a following.
Yeah,
and I only saw it wasn't even that long ago that he's started one, and it just looks from the outside that he's started one not because he really wants to, but because he kind of has to and needs to as a professional athlete. Just the way he posts and doesn't look that personalized. He's not sharing too much openly about like who he is and his lifestyle. He's just kind of sharing results and photos from certain tournaments and third round of Indian Wells, let's go kind of thing. Curious to know how that started, and second part is, did you guys help him build that social media, and was that part of the contract?
Yeah. So Dan, you picked it up well. Dan's not big on social media, admits it, and we're trying to help him to get a bit better. And as you say, it's not just about posting, it's what you post, it's what that reflects, and people are all, the whole thing of social media is you feel like you're best friends you're inside someone's life all of a sudden. So if you're not posting something that's a bit more personal and about your life, you lose that benefit. So you see your followers don't rev up as much as they should. Mm-hmm. And certainly compared to other people who are very good at opening up every aspect of their life.
Look at Nick, for example.
Yeah.
Just massive, markets himself unbelievably in that way.
He does. I find Nick's post bit repetitive though, like they're very much the same. He'll post something off of Spotify about a rapper, and he'll he'll do highlights of himself and sort of stuff, so but I have to say the resources for players for everyone across all sports is better. Like they gear up, they want to promote the sport as well at the same time, not just promoting the individual can promote the sport. So you go to a tournament now and they've got official photographers, and all the players get access to all of the photos, so they can go in, get a proper professional. So it's not about them taking the photo necessarily. You get a proper professional doing it. Someone like Daria Saville, who we represent, is brilliant on social media
awesome.
and TikTok as well.
Yes.
Not that I'm on TikTok, but I know she's
all over it.
Yeah.
I was talking to a previous guest about her, and just the way she kind of documents her life and shares, and just like even like with her dog, and then Luke, and then a day in the life of a pro. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
You actually get captivated watching it, going like, wow, this is interesting the way they live their lives.
Yeah, it is. It's getting an insight into them personally, and Daria's good at that. I'm sure there is a boundary there somewhere, but even Tofu, her dog, has his own Instagram account, I think, as well. So so it connects with people. And then unfortunately, Daria was injured last year, as you know, and for the Australian Open, we were able to do a deal for Daria with Channel 9 for her to basically we were talking about commentating, but what suited them and her more was to do sort of more of an online platform for Channel 9, going around and, the inside view of what happens at a tournament in the locker room and talking to specific players and those sorts of things. She took her dog around everywhere as well. So that's, when you do it well, it attracts commercial opportunities.
For sure. So did you almost seek that out for her to say, you're already good at this, we feel like we could get you in at Channel 9 and actually get you a role that's similar to what you do on your own Instagram in this mainstream media space?
You mean post tennis or during?
Did you seek out that deal for her during the Australian Open? For her to be with Channel 9?
Absolutely, and we're already talking to Channel 9. Leighton is obviously one of the lead commentators on Channel 9, so we know the guys at Channel 9. We talked to them, we spoke to them. Like Luke Sebastiani, Dara's husband. He's very interesting. You wouldn't probably know it. He's a quiet, unassuming, loveliest bloke you'll ever meet. But he's really interested in getting into me. So we were actually talking to them about several players. But then with Daria, you had about commentating generally, and there's a number of commentary opportunities or on the sidelines. And Luke ended up doing some stuff. And then we spoke to them about Daria and other players as well. And they were, we put to them her social media and TikTok and all that. And they then go and do their own research and they say, love that pitch is fantastic. We want to do it. It's an area we need to get better in, etc. And they, I think they do it every year now. It was a huge success for them.
That's awesome. I want to go back to Dan Evans though.
I think I got off track there.
No. It was great. It was a great sidetrack moment there. But Dan Evans, how did that start? Because he is your biggest tennis player that you work with to date. That you currently work with. So how did that all unfold?
So it's an interesting story, and for the sake of time, I'll try and keep it to the short version of it because there's a very long version that would go for about an hour. But fundamentally, we signed Dan after Wimbledon last year, and I was at Wimbledon with Steve Baldus, our CEO, and we were there representing our players. But we did say we were keeping an eye out for other players, and particularly we're very strong with Australian players, and we said if we're going to develop this business, we really need to start looking at international players and signing some international players generally. And we had some good ins with some ex-players like Henri Leconte and a few others, and Steve's had some really good contacts. He went to college in the US, so he knew the Bryan brothers and a few others as well. So we'd sort of been having conversations. But anyway, so Jason Kubler, who we represent, first round of Wimbledon, he's playing Dan Evans, and because he was the number 2 British player at the time, but there was obviously at Wimbledon huge interest. So Jason was playing on one of the outside stadium courts, as opposed to sort of just a non-stadium court. And so we were there. I was sitting in the players' box, Jason's players' box, and at Wimbledon the player boxes are set up a little bit strangely. Like in Australia, they're sort of at each end, but at Wimbledon, in most of the courts, the 2 players' boxes are right next to each other on a corner. So you're really sitting next to them. And Dan wasn't playing well, and Dan's a pretty fiery customer, and he was saying a few choice words back to his coach up in his coaching box. And as he's sort of saying these choice words up there, his eye direction was going straight into our players' box at the same time. And not to me, but Leighton Hewitt was sitting next to me. And Leighton had played Dan. Dan's 32, would have been 31 at the time, but towards the early stages of his career, I think he played Leighton a few times. So Leighton was sort of giving me a bit of intel about, you watch, he's going to fire up and he's going to get the crowd, try and get him on his side. He was saying a few things. And so we were probably getting a bit stuck into him as well to put him off his game, as you're supposed to do in the players' box sometimes, just more cheering on Coobs than being negative to him. But anyway, didn't like it, and he kept looking and anyway, cut it short, he lost the match, straight sets. Yeah. And so it was a great win for Coobs. He ended up going to the 4th round that year. So he was on fire, and I got in trouble at a few other matches as well after that, particularly from Jack Sock. But anyway, so that was and finished. I had a young lawyer who I used to work with me at the law firm here, and he'd gone to England. He's now a big partner in a big firm there, and we were having dinner at that night. He was at the match as well. So we nicked off straight away after the match to this restaurant that he'd booked, and which was in Wimbledon Village up there. So we're having dinner, finished dinner with Steve, our CEO, as well. And Steve was tired. He said, I'm going to go back home, and I was catching up. So I said, well, let's go. He suggested we go for a drink. So I reluctantly said yes. Went just across the road from the restaurant. It's this little cocktail bar thing, and just starting having a few drinks. And anyway, in walks Dan Evans.
No way. And
his whole entourage, because he's finished, they were having a drink. So he was going to go back up to Birmingham where he lives. And so they were out sort of commiserating or celebrating. And this place we were had a little booze and waiters that were serving you. And I'm sort of looking. We were right in the booth next to him, and I was right opposite him. So I think I was probably staring at Dan, but all I was thinking was, I don't want to be like a fanboy or a dickhead, you know. And I was just thinking about the way I should try and approach him, because you take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves.
Absolutely.
And so I thought I'll do the old. After a while, I thought I'll get the waiter and find out what they drink and send over a drink thing.
Classy.
And they'll drink his champagne, so get them a bottle of whatever champagne they're drinking, and that'll give me the entree to go and talk to him. And I was actually standing up, talking to the waiter, telling him to do it. And when the waiter walked off, Dan Evans is standing right behind the waiter. Anyway, he goes to town at me. What the F this? You're staring at me, you're pointing your finger at me, and you want to go. You're like, well, he is in my face, and I'm just thinking he's about to punch me, right? Like, he's absolutely going to. I'm trying to calm down, and he heard my Australian accent. He goes, you're an Aussie, you dickhead, you're this and this, and really aggressively having a go at me, and for probably a 5-minute rant. And everything I said to him, he wouldn't calm down. And then the only break in it, and the only relief I sort of got from the thinking that I was about to get punched, was the waiter came back with the bottle of champagne, and he saw it because I said send it over to Dan. Dan was out now at the front of our table, so he sort of said, "Oh, sir, do you want still that over here? You want that here?" And I'm thinking, well, I'm not buying him a bottle of champagne anymore now. This guy's about to kill me. So I just said, put it on my table. But I think Dan had saw that I wasn't an idiot, and I'd even said to him, I was at your match today, and I was there, and he goes, I saw you there, and with your idiot mate Hewitt as well, and he was getting the barrage out to everyone. Anyway, as soon as the waiter put the bottle of champagne down, he ripped this bottle out of the ice, and I thought, oh, here we go, he's going to whack me with it. And he made a joke. He made an English joke, like in England we don't put champagne on ice. We drink it warm like our beer, sort of thing. And I'm thinking, oh, hold on, he's not yelling at me anymore, so that was good. Anyway, as it turns out, we ended up having this greatest conversation after that. I met all his entourage. We were, spoke about everything with his footy. Actually, it turned out he said, he loved Leighton. Leighton was his inspiration to play, and he liked Coobs as well. He knew Coobs really well. So, he just said Coobs had a few injuries in his life, and he said he's really playing, at the level he really thought Coobs could keep going, and which he ended up doing. And so after the hour conversation, obviously the conversation had worked towards him and his management, and he basically said, look, I had a manager, didn't really do much for me. Now I've got one of my mates is doing it, and, he probably could be doing a bit better, and he's probably not accessing a lot of areas that you guys probably would. And so by the end of the night, we'd agreed to sign him. And so we swapped numbers and took some photos and everything, and then so I messaged him the next day saying, fantastic, thinking he'd say, look, I'd had a few beers, and what I said, forget it, I don't want to sign with an Australian management company. And he messaged me straight back, said, yep, fantastic, let's get this happening, let's get it. So we put a formal sort of deck to him to go through it, and then we kept communicating. But then I went to the US Open, myself and Steve Baldus went there with the sole purpose. He'd had the contract then to represent him, and we signed it all up at the US Open. And so we started managing him, without a contract from Wimbledon. Mm. And we got all our strategies and everything in place there now. So, and we're just been communicating with him, got, getting some really good sponsorship deals for him. Mm. Do need to work on his social media, but it's going really well. And now we're sort of setting the bar again, like we sort of, thought it was impossible to sign an international player, and now we're sort of saying we've done that, we're doing well, we can always improve on it, but now we've got to expand the people we represent even more broadly.
Wow, what a story. Nothing like just a bit of a tiff and then it turning around and then being best mates by the end.
Yeah. And he's a lovely guy, like Dan is, he's got that, rough edge to him, yes. But he's like several people we represent, the looks can be deceiving like that. Yeah. But he's in fact, he's so a bit more mature, being 32 as well. So, he's one that always gets back to you straight away, So whereas others, you send them a message and they never get back to you, sort of thing. But he's very professional, very diligent in what he does, and a real pleasure to represent.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because that's one thing that I observe in Dan is just, I like how authentic he is. Like like you said, he's rough around the edges. He'll get passionate. He'll get fiery, but he's just not this monotone bloke. And he'll just be himself, and he'll fire up, and he's not afraid and not ashamed to do that. And I think really just nice and humble and good bloke off the court from some of the interviews that I've listened to. So what sort of things have you put in place since working with Dan that to, I guess, catapult his career and give him more security so that he can just play at a higher level and get him better endorsement deals, for example?
Yeah, look, he's not, again, being a bit older and being around the block a bit and achieving what he's achieved is not, he's not, as opposed to a younger tennis player who would look for opportunities really to pay their costs on a day-to-day basis. So Dan's earned, a huge amount of prize money over the years. He's knocking on the door of a career best ranking in the top 20, which we hope he'll get into very shortly, if not at Wimbledon. And, so he's got direct entry into all Grand Slams. He's a seeded player at the Grand Slam. So it's an easier path for him. But Dan is one, and Leighton certainly is another as well, probably even more so, that will put opportunities to him. He'll say no. He's very knows where his brand is and what he does. He doesn't want to look like, I think his words are, I don't want to look like a billboard out on court. So he's been there, done that. Whereas a younger player would say, I don't care if I look like a billboard, just if you can get me good money, it helps me pay some bills. Is that Hewitt saying that, sorry? Both Dan and Leighton. So, when they're a bit more mature, they're at that part. So Dan's more about, I should be doing more, not I need to do more. I should be doing more in the commercial space. I should be getting more opportunities. I should be taking it probably a bit more seriously than I had been previously. And it would be, you guys can help me by representing me to put it out there a little bit more for me. But he won't. Those deals have to be, sort of high-level deals for him, and that's what we target at as well.
What sort of deals would appeal to someone like Dan, for example, where he would be more likely to say yes versus no? Yeah,
so, for a start, every tennis player, pretty much that's a professional tennis player, that all got a racket deal, all got a clothing deal, and usually a shoe deal that might be tied in with the clothing deal or not, or could be separate. And when I say they've got a deal, sometimes it's just to supply product, and others it's upfront money, and others it's in the sort of middle where is product plus some bonuses around performance and ranking and performance at usually Grand Slams and sort of 1,000 tournaments, maybe sometimes 500s. And so with Dan, part of it was his clothing deal was sort of with this company called Luke, which is from Birmingham, and but it's not very well known. They do a bit in golf as well. So one of the first areas we did for Dan was to look at the clothing contract he had, look at his racket deal and his shoe deal, and try and get him a better deal, for it, or at least measure it. So that was sort of what I call the low-hanging fruit to look at. But he likes Luke. It's a great brand, and it's from where he's from as well. So there was that loyalty to it, and they've been really good to him. So, whilst we looked at the contract and probably said to him, there's better deals out there for you at some of the bigger clothing manufacturers, which he wanted to know, but he wanted to stick. He was loyal to his brand at Luke. So racket deal and shoe deal as well, are things that we are looking at. He had deals, so when they come up for renewal. And then there's the other commercial opportunities we've been looking at for him are focused. There's a bit of technology space around at the moment. When we first started, there was a bit around in the sort of crypto, space, which has died off now. Just trying to think of other things. We look at car deals for him and those sorts of things, targeted, banks and financial institutions. He's at that level that we're looking at, that sort of, level for him in terms of those sorts of endorsement deals.
Yeah, because you do see a lot of the bigger guys having those sort of deals, whereas maybe the other ones between, let's say, 20 and 100, not getting those sort of looks in.
Yeah, it depends. There's 20 to 100 when you're sort of on the way out, and there's 20 to 100 when you're on the way in. So Alex Demonar, who we'd represented I think he was something like 380 in the world when we started representing him, and he dropped to 17 in the world but during the time we represented him. we were still getting a lot of interest from Alex when he was, 200, which is unheard of if you're a player sort of maybe moving the other way. And but if there's a perception that you've got the potential to get into the top 20, you start to see endorsement deals even at the lower levels of ranking on potential and promise.
Yeah, what did you help Alex with in the early phases from that 300 to 200 to 100?
Yeah, so Alex was at that stage and just a great kid, Alex, and had a tough, upbringing. But he had 3 siblings, or 4 of them altogether, all younger than him. And he was trying to go on the international tour as a junior player at that time, moving into the seniors, and also trying to help his family live at the same time as well. It was estranged from his dad, and he was very. You just got to have the most admiration for him at the time. So he's really had this purpose of, if I can get some money that helps me to, to get around the world, but also will help my family at the same time. So again, I think at that stage there was some negotiations. There was getting support from Tennis Australia as well, and they have obviously support all the junior players. So it was some of it was just negotiating with TA. Others were looking at his racket deals with Wilson and ASIC's clothing and shoes. So we were negotiating those deals for him as well at the same time. And then there were some other, like we got him a deal with Sanitarium as a, Weet-Bix kid, and Anik as a drink manufacturer. So that's still on his sleeve. We did a deal with Lavazza Coffee. They were sponsoring the Next Gen finals in Milan back then every year, and so they were looking at directly sponsoring some players as well. So we did a deal with them, I remember, and Tag Heuer were his. We got him a deal with them as well on the watch side of it. So Alex was really appreciative of. He was winning a lot of. He then started winning a lot of money, obviously, in tournaments, and he also then started being able to command some appearance fees at a few tournaments as well, particularly in Australia. And so there was a lot around all of those, bringing all of those together.
That's really interesting, and I didn't know that backstory behind Alex. But just looking from the outside, you can kind of see that focus and that desire that he has, and why it makes sense why he's doing what he's doing to, I guess, give back to his family and make sure that everything's all sweet. Because he's one of the most focused, determined guys you'll see out there in the whole tour. It's just that drive and how much focus he has in his eyes. It's it reminds me of Leighton a lot in many ways. That kind of look in the eyes and that absolute desire for and hustle for every single point and every single time he plays. There's just so much passion and energy.
Yeah, very similar. And that's he's not the biggest guy out on the tour, and he's one of the quickest, and he runs everything down. He makes every player he plays, doesn't matter if he was 6 love up or 6 love down, he runs down every point, makes that player play an extra shot or two. And sometimes we'll just wear a player down. But he's also so passionate. It's very similar to Leighton about Australia and representing Australia. It's certainly something disappointing that I've seen, and I know Leighton gets very disappointed about it, is that players don't prioritise representing their country, but Alex absolutely does, and he'd play that in priority over anything else. So I think that also drives that connection with Leighton as well.
Yeah, for sure. It makes sense why they're so close.
Yeah.
Now, Kyle Chalmers, who you guys work with and represent, he was involved in controversy during, it was Olympic trials, right?
Olympic trials, yeah. Well, there's been a couple, but there was the Olympic trials was the main.
So the media were just all over him that time. It was just everywhere. And he was going through all sorts. So my question is, how did you manage that controversy, and how do you manage controversy in general when you are working with a particular athlete? Yeah,
look, and it comes up from time to time, and obviously particularly with the higher profile players and the way media is these days and the journos, it sells, they don't sell papers anymore, but sell subscriptions or whatever, but people, it's probably a poor reflection on human society that they're the stories that people read and like and will go back to. So it's not the journo's fault, they're just meeting the demand. But it is just back to what we do as a role. Certainly, damage control in a situation like that, dealing with the media is in our wheelhouse. That's something we take responsibility for. Some athletes are are better at it than others themselves, and others need, a lot of help if something like that comes along. Now, and Kyle's, one of the most level-headed, sort of guys, high-performing athletes that you'll ever see. So he knows where he's at, and he's got a good sort of calm, personality, for such an intense event that he races in as well. But so that controversy that occurred, I think, was very media driven. It was probably just trying to get a bit more excitement, and obviously just played on the element of Cody Simpson, who was there, who had broader appeal to the general, public that would read those stories. So I think they were leveraging that opportunity and poking the bear a little bit. Now Kyle, and they painted. I think Kyle was painted well. Probably we. For a start, just to answer your question, we are there to support Kyle in that situation. So we were speaking to him all the time and just giving him some strategies and helping him through. Now, sometimes they adopt the strategies and sometimes they don't. Usually the strategy, almost invariably in a situation like that, is to not say anything. Don't feed the fire. The more you say, the more it get twisted, the more it get turned, the more focus will be on one word here and one word that. So it doesn't matter. The more you try and explain your situation, the bigger the bigger the hole you're digging as well. So, but in this situation, Kyle wanted to be heard and it was, even though it was painted as being about him, it wasn't about him at all. He was actually defending all of the other athletes that were in that pool, some of whom were doing some amazing, miraculous things and setting records, and the media weren't even focusing on that. So his biggest gripe in that whole situation was, stop talking about this rubbish thing over here that means nothing and start focusing on what we're all here for, which is, celebrating these athletes that are representing Australia or going to represent Australia. And and that's what you should be focusing on. So it ended up, the symbolic thing with Kyle was that when he won the 100-metre race and he put his finger up to his lips, which I think has become a symbol of sure. Sort of, against the media and a little bit. And I've seen photos of people on social media who've tattooed that on them, that picture of Kyle. So it ended up becoming a great symbol for him, and look, he didn't. Again, we had the opportunity. We get journalists ring us up all the time, people wanting to do feature stories on him, and our job was just to block all of that as well. Yeah. He didn't want to do it. He ended up, I think, with Mark Soderstrom or something like that. So he was good mates with. Did a podcast with him, and it got printed in the advertisement. That was some time after that, and he sort of felt like the dust had settled a little bit, that he could speak out around it.
Yeah, that was big from him to have all of that fire coming at him, and then just to speak against it, support all his athletes, and then go out there and do the job, because you can talk all you want, but if you don't go out there and perform and do the job when it comes down to crunch time, then you're going to get that backlash again. So he was
and there's so much pressure on these guys, and particularly Kyle. He obviously won the gold medal in Rio as an 18-year-old. He got silver at Tokyo by 0.06 of a second. So it's not, I think I Googled how long does a sneeze take, and it was like triple that time, is what a sneeze takes. So it was really, by whisker, as we did. The positive out of that was Kyle's now sponsored by Wall, WAHL, the shaver. Yeah. They do the massage sort of guns as well. But they, out of that, they wanted to do a whole big advertising campaign about making sure you're clean shaven, because sometimes you miss out by a whisker. So that was the thematic around the thing, and they're a great sponsor for Kyle as well. Mm.
With Olympic athletes, how do you go about helping them? Because with a lot of these athletes in the Olympics, they're just not making that much money. They're not getting the money from their sport. So I guess endorsement deals and deals in general in that space become even more important for athletes like that, so they actually can do the career that they love to do.
Yeah.
So how do you help those specific athletes compared to maybe like other sports where it's more obvious, like AFL or tennis?
No, it's a great question, and it's a common issue through all sports. And, again, have to take my hat off to some of these, athletes in all forms of sport, that because if you're the, 200th best in the world, which is an amazing feat in itself, or the best in the world, you are putting in the same or very similar time and effort and dedication into your sport. When you get up high, you spend more money on people around you, but you're still living and breathing. So just the admiration I have for someone who's doing that, and then potentially even, stocking shelves at a supermarket at night time just to put food on the table, and then getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and swim laps in a pool, or, and so we're there to help. The Olympics is typical of that as well, because you've got, and particularly swimming is a huge effort. They're in the pool twice a day, 6.5 days a week, from 12 years old to, or even younger sometimes, right through to when they finish their career. But so it's a huge effort for them, and then trying to reward, them by the ones we represent, at least by getting them endorsement deals is essential for them. So sometimes it's not just about getting them money to, live a high life. It's about getting money to help them live day to day as 100%. Well. The harsh reality on it is, and I'd like to see this change if it can, and they talk about it often in tennis in terms of distribution of prize money, is that when, that you can't force a company to have commercial appeal for someone, no matter how great you think they are. The company knows who they want to represent their brand, and sometimes it is a up and coming player or a grassroots player or a player that's got something, a particular avenue around their lifestyle. Riley Day, who's a Olympic runner that we have represented since she was a kid as well, is a classic example of that. She's a great, again, fantastic person. She was running, training 7 days a week, I think it was, up in Northern Queensland, where she's from, and working at Woolies, every second day, and trying to do school as well and everything. And so, and whilst a lot of people wouldn't know who Riley Day is and she doesn't have that profile, we were able to get a really good sponsorship deal with Woolies, because Woolies wanted to show they were, supporting young players, and that, she loved working there, and, so it generated into something. And also with Riley, back to social media as well, a good strategy. She's very good on social media, and at Tokyo, when she ran, I think it was at Tokyo, yeah, and they do the interviews post race. So Phoebe, who's in our office, knew one of the journos and just said, you just ask her about Woolies for a start, working and all that, and ask her about her social media following. And so because we were trying to help her build it all up, and so she mentioned her Instagram handle it didn't look obvious. It was just part of the interview process, but her Instagram following went absolutely through. I think she picked up 50 or 60,000 followers instantaneously just from that. So there's little strategies to help the athletes when we can as well, when the opportunity presents it. So
yeah, that's really smart. Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard to make money, especially in sport like running. Like Jess Stenson, who we spoke to, she said she was working for 8 years as a physio, and just saying yes and no to certain deals, that now she's only starting to make some money with the right deals, where she doesn't have to be a part-time physio. Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. So yeah, you definitely take your hat off to these athletes.
Yeah, it's across the board, and so it's hard enough to be a top level athlete without throwing some of these things on top of you. And tennis is exactly the same. I mean, some tennis players have great support from their parents, and others don't have anything support, so they have to take what TAA give them, and then they don't get to choose who their coach is, and they get have to go into the system. So it doesn't suit, but when you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice. And tennis is actually good in Australia, where you can get that support. Most other sports don't have the support there for it. And, Swimming Australia even used to give reasonable support to the swimmers, but that's cut back now because of financial issues that they're having as well. So, it's just a lot of people don't know that, when they think of an up-and-coming athlete, I think they think, they're living the dream and travelling around the world, and isn't it fantastic, and don't see the struggle side of it as well at the same time.
So essentially, your hands are tied in a way. Like, you do the best you can for these Olympic athletes, but bottom line is there isn't as much as what you can do for these guys, and they have to have a second job most of the time, or they have to do some other stuff.
Yeah, look, back to the original point I was saying, we like managing expectations of the athlete. We do, so we represent talent that
you don't promise the world to them,
and we only really represent people who we think we can get some opportunities for, and that's part of it. As I said, if we don't add value to them, there's no point in them signing. I reckon tomorrow, if we wanted to, we could represent 200 Olympic athletes without a question. They'd all say, "Yeah, that's I'd like someone out there." Mm-hmm. Looking for stuff, but we won't do it, if we don't think there's not an opportunity to.
Mm. And also sounds like you've got to be creative in the way you do it. Like this situation with getting Woolies on board, that is outside the box thinking to actually get some money coming in for this athlete, for Riley.
Yeah, look, it's being creative and thinking outside the box helps, but opportunities come in sometimes we get phone calls, people contact us or contact the athlete and they pass it on to us and say where they want to represent them. Again, back to social media, anyone can sort of communicate with an athlete, and part of the strategy to stop the athlete being annoyed with that stuff is often our talent manager's email address will go into their Instagram account.
See that a lot now.
Yeah, so they can not be bothered all the time, sort of thing. So, but there are what we call inbound opportunities, and then there are outbound opportunities where we look at targeting a particular sponsor for a reason. It might be a sponsor that we've got a great relationship with already, or that sponsored another athlete, or it might be someone we're just developing for that athlete because we think they're good. In general terms, we do a lot of analysis. We're starting to get better at it. It's doing a lot of analysis on the athlete to look at different sponsorship categories. So there's certain athletes we would say we really should be looking at, they should be getting a car sponsor or a car deal. They should be getting a watch sponsor or watch deal. Clothing obviously is depending on the sport, or boots, even for football and those sorts of things. So there are different categories where we say if we're doing our job properly, we should be ticking the box on all of those categories, even if it's just a in-kind deal where they're just getting product or something like that at the very least. And sometimes you get them and sometimes you don't. But our job is to always be asking the question of someone, to always be looking for something until we get a no.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really smart. And the journey that you guys have been on, you'd be getting so much better at knowing, okay, this would be perfect for this athlete, or this kind of tier of sponsorship would be really great for that athlete. So I think you'd be refining your process as you go along this journey for, 8 years now?
Yeah. Very much so. Sometimes beggars can't be choosers, though. Yep. So, sometimes it's just about getting a deal, whether we think it's, the absolute ideal opportunity for the talent or not. It's not our job to be too fussy on it, or we know our talent well, so often we're not going to waste their time or ours getting opportunities they're not going to go for. So there's a bit about that, but at the end of the day, again, back to the sort of up and coming talent we've got, I think you could put a deal in front of them for anyone at any level and they wouldn't say no to it. They'd say yes. So there's a real element in us targeting sponsors generally. There's a bit of an art to it, and sometimes we target sponsors that aren't even athlete specific. So we just go to a company that we know are out, like crypto is a good example, where your conversation is more about, we've got a stable of athletes here, we see you're out there doing it. We think you'd be served well with a brand ambassador. Here's the list of talent we've got, or go on our website and have a look. And then they come back to us saying, that would be good. And these are the sort of athletes we'd be looking at. So sometimes we're not going into that conversation just even with an athlete in mind.
Sure, that makes sense. So the general public paint pro athletes as superheroes. Being in the inner sanctum, what do you see? So are these guys superhuman? Are they just normal guys and girls? Or do they have even more issues?
I think it's sort of down to how you define superhuman. Everyone we represent is obviously human. I think it's their ability to extract every last bit of their humanity into a particular endeavour that sets them apart from others, and of course the dedication to do that. So, and I have nothing but the utmost of admiration for everyone we represent and all those that we don't represent as well, looking at the amount of dedication they have to something. And particularly back to my earlier comment about, when they've got to work a couple of jobs just to sort of put food on the table, and they're doing that and they're dedicating themselves to this. It's very rare that you ever see an athlete. In fact, I can't even think of an example that just has natural ability and can live off their natural ability. Everyone worked, even the media people I know, they work really hard on their chosen profession. They practice it. They leave nothing to chance. So even though the general public might think that, a tennis player just rocks up to a match, or a football player rocks up to a match, or a swimmer just gets out there and swim, and they were born that way, it's never the case. And I would say, I'm sure there's studies on this, but it would almost I do hear things about Novak Djokovic and these guys, that even and Cristiano Ronaldo and the guys that are super elite, you think, they put their feet up, surely they're at the top now, they can rest and relax. And you hear they get to that level and they go to the next level after that. So there's no, and I know Leighton Hewitt was still trains regularly, and it's part of his DNA to work hard and train, and he did that when he played as well. He'd just go above and beyond, and took the view, I'm sure all of these athletes take the view, is that I have to be one step ahead. I have to be that next level. If I think I'm training hard enough, there's always another gear I can go into, and that's their challenge, is to get into that next gear. So it's always about hard work, in my view. I mean, of course, you've got to have a semblance of natural ability or talent, but the guy we represent, talking about juniors as well, Alex Vukic, who's a great tennis player, and I was having a chat with him last year at some
just
stage.
entered the top 100 again.
Just
for the second time, I reckon.
First time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He went to college, so.
Yeah.
But he said it's high school. He was a terrible tennis player. Yeah. He doesn't even know how he ended up in tennis, because it just clicked one day. He got a bit bigger, and next thing he got picked in something that he wasn't meant to be picked in, and just took it to the next level. And he got into college, which he thought was a great opportunity. He's come out, and he's hitting his peak of his career now. And I think there's huge opportunity for Alex to go to the next level, even though if you looked at the stats, he's a bit older, in terms of getting into the top 100, he's 25, and but there's still plenty in Alex's tank. But sometimes that natural ability doesn't present itself, early on, or it's not always there, and it can come, when you least expect it.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. I love those stories of the guys and the girls that end up getting there through that hard work and maybe overlooked early on. So my next question for you, as we look to close this conversation, is where do you want to take this business next? You started really talking about targeting international, but where do you see your media company, sports and media company, going in the next years ahead?
It's interesting and topical. We've got some exciting stuff that I can't talk about at the moment in the offing for the sports management company. We'll talk about it in maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But we're looking at growing. So we'll put it that as a big sort of, as an overriding thing, not going back to just growing for growth's sake, but growing into targeted areas, and also looking internationally as more of a focus, not taking our eye off the ball in Australia. But there are particular sports as well that I think we'd like to get better in. Golf is one of them. There's a lot of activity in golf at the moment. We represent Wade Ormsby, who's an absolute champion. He's part of the Live tournament.
I was going to say, is Live Golf made you want to enter that space even more?
I think so. I think when there's disruption in a sport like that, it's good for people like us. It means there's divergence between a bit of chaos never goes astray sometimes, and there's a lot of chaos in golf at the moment, and it's a bit to play out in that space. But you start to see doors opening up that weren't there before, and sometimes, I'm not professing there's a clear strategy around it, but sometimes you just got to put yourself into the fire and things appear, and that's what golf is at the moment. So we want to get closer into golf and look at the opportunities that are there, and there's a lot of money in golf as well. So obviously people talk about Live and the Saudi money, but there's still sponsorships. People look, when the spotlight's on a sport like that, companies want to get closer to it. They see the attention that it's getting, and that's good for a brand who's trying to get their brand out there. Some brands stay away from controversy, obviously, and that's another element. But most, what do they say? Any news is good news sort of thing, bad news. And anyway, so I think that's certainly the targeted area around that. Look, in terms of tennis, I think we would be the largest, talent agency in Australia in respect of tennis, representing, nearly all. In fact, our major competitor is Tennis Australia, who have their own management arm, which is, a bit strange, but so they represent a few players, but, we've taken over some players that they represented and who were previous TA players, and that we represent them. So, there's sort of us. If you take TA out of it, there's us and Daylight, I think, to the next management company in Australia. But again, it's an international sport. Australia's a long way away. We need to, be more international, make ourselves look more international, and I think that'll help not only in tennis but in other sports as well.
For sure. No, I'm loving that drive. So is there one person that you would love to work with?
Talent represent, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, we were having a conversation about this last night, actually, and we went around the room, and I picked someone that I thought and sort of got laughed at a little bit, which I was surprised. But yeah, it depends on your view on what you're passionate about. But I mentioned last night I'd love to represent, even now in his career, but someone like Michael Jordan. Yeah. I just think someone who changed the sport off their own back, and Tiger Woods was the other example I gave as well. Now both of them are, divisive figures these days, but I think what they did in their sport at the time, is just amazing. And I love people who, you look back in history of time, and particularly in most sports, but in other endeavours, there's someone who changed the game, someone who took it to another level, and then everyone plays catch up to that. And what I love, so until they've done it, no one thinks about, they always think there's this ceiling here, nothing's never going to happen, and that person breaks that ceiling, and then it's open for everyone again, sort of. And I think both of them are the pinnacles of what that represents. And I think if we could look, one guy at the moment that we do represent through our we've got a joint venture with an Indian talent agency called Cornerstone, and they represent Virat Kohli. So we represent Virat Kohli in Australia. And so we always look for opportunities, him and several other Indian cricket players. And cricket is a religion in India. So I haven't met Virat before. We always do our negotiations and deals through the agency, but I'm sure we'll get to meet Virat at some stage. And, he's, from an Indian, which is huge. I mean,
he's God over there.
And from an Instagram follow, he's in top 5 in the world internationally of everyone in terms of social media followings and those sorts of things. So it's a real privilege and honour to say we represent him in that sense. And he's certainly something that's a current person that's, probably not changing the game or anything like that, like the other two, but it's great to have an association with someone who's, at the pinnacle of world sport.
To close today, in your experience in this 8-year journey, has there been one person that really stands out that you think about a lot, that you've worked with or currently still working with, that you represent for any particular reasons?
Yeah, look, it's hard to say. We always say, we joke about who's the nicest person, we represent, and we represent a lot of really nice people who probably could justify not being so nice, but they're very humble and again at the pinnacle of their sport. And I won't name names around that, but the one I think I always like a bit of a underdog story or pick something that you wouldn't normally think of, but the one person who was our first ever AFL player that we represented back in the years, and who is just a legend of a guy called Kyle Hartigan, who played footy for the Crows, and then we got him a deal with Hawthorn. He's just retired this year. But he is one of the most humble guys you'll ever meet, and he never asked for anything. And so they're sort of a huge delight to work for them. And I think he broke the ground for us into AFL, and he was one of the people that I think then, promoted us out there word of mouth, because we were doing, and we weren't getting him massive deals or anything like that, but, he appreciated any effort. And I think in in life, in our sports management company, if I look back at the time, Kyle's always going to have a special place in my heart as not being the highlight player that we've ever had, but he might disagree with that. But as being one of the people that made me think this is what we're doing this for. It's not to represent Virat Kohli. It's actually to represent people like Kyle, and we've got a number of those people. In fact, vast majority of those people are on our books already. But, just gives you some perspective around the business and why you're doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a delight it is to work with people like that, for sure. Garry, thanks so much. This has been awesome. I've absolutely loved just hearing about this whole world, and I've got so many more questions that maybe say for another time. And when you maybe land some big deals, you might have to get you back on to talk all about it. So thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Luke. It's been an absolute pleasure, and in my first podcast, so I'm glad it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks, Luke.
Cheers.